guys, and welcome back to Is This Thing podcast with myself, Alicia Knowles, and my co-host, Michael Jansen. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different compared to what we would usually do. Obviously, the state of the world is, for lack of better words, a mess, and I think it's our place to kind of at least recognize that. Take a minute to pause in this moment and have a discussion about it. We both come from vastly different backgrounds. Michael's from South Africa, so he has his share of perspective, and obviously I'm from America. So just want to get into it a little bit. I don't know how long this podcast is actually going to be, but to give you guys some resources, in the description box below, there'll be resources to foundations you can donate to, petitions you can sign, resources if somebody you know has been arrested for any of the protests, for any of the protests, bail charities that you can donate to help get those people out. A numerous amount of resources will be in the link in the description. So how are you, Michael?
I'm doing okay. We've taken a break for a couple of weeks, and I think we needed, from a production perspective, for like actually creating the podcast, we needed a break, but also I think where we ended off last time on the first version of this episode was kind of all over the place. And I think the world we live in today in the last couple of weeks has changed a lot.
Vastly.
And I wanted very much for us to have our say and kind of put our stake in the ground from where we stand as a podcast and where we stand as creators, and friends, family members, and people, pretty much.
Yeah.
How have you been the last couple of weeks?
I have been less than impressed with the state of the world, obviously. More than that, I think I've just been I want to say very alert, very aware. Obviously, being American, it's something that with everything going on that we have talked about for a long time. I know my upbringing is very different from some other people's with my particular complexion. But I guess it just opens up a bunch of old wounds, if that makes sense. And for me, it's a privilege to be able to say old. And I recognize that more than ever. For me, it was, I'm seeing like stories that we've talked about or old cases or whatever. And it's not so much at the forefront of my mind all the time. And then you get to see people speaking out and having conversations about this. And for a lot of Americans, Black Americans particularly, this is on the forefront of their mind 24/7, 365, every day of the year. And I think that's something that's been really lost in translation, is that for a white American, we're looking at it as isolated incidents, stories that happen when they make mass media, when there's a protest, when there's riots. Not realizing that people live in this fear and this oppression every single day of their lives.
How has that? How you've lived out of the US for a couple of years now? How has sort of your lens on things changed, or has it changed, if at all?
From being here, I think so. I've been out for 4 years. I think that the one thing that has stood out among everything is that America is literally kind of the center of the world. Everybody's talking about this. Everybody's able to host a discussion off this, whether that's what they're dealing with at home, race issues within their own communities. There's just like a plethora of conversation that's been happening over these past few weeks that is in direct result of what is happening in America. So it's just, and then we need to behave right, act accordingly. what's the words I'm looking for? When Karen is acting a fool, she's setting an example for the rest of the world. And she's setting a precedent of what is a behavior that is acceptable. And it isn't. And I think that's something that we need to check and correct moving forward, I guess. But there's also a lot of people in solidarity here, which I think is really cool, who you see people saying Black Lives Matter here. And from countries that I think if you ask 70% of Americans, they wouldn't know where they are. They couldn't point them out on a map, yet they're still standing in support of the movements going on in the U.S. And I think that's absolutely beautiful.
That's an interesting distinction. I hadn't thought of that. That is beautiful. The thing... This is it both is and isn't a tough conversation to have, because I guess in its most simplistic form, all we are asking people is just don't be a douchebag, and don't treat someone badly based on the color of their skin. But as much as that's oversimplistic, that's an incredibly complicated ask, it seems. And for reasons that only the people who used to write in feather pen could probably explain, it seems like it's reaching a point, I hope that it's reaching a point now where it's make or break, as in we can't go back from this point. Like, we've seen protests in the past, we've seen stuff happen since the 60s. And I'm really hoping from the bottom of my heart that it's going to be something that we can't go back, and the protests aren't going to die down. People aren't going to go back to complacency rather. It's not going to be something that dies down, because we know how much and how deeply ingrained in society it's become, and we know how dangerous it is in a world where people have to say that if you're a white person at a Black Lives Matter protest, stand in front of a black person because the police are less likely to shoot you or to harm you. That's like, it's unfathomable. To me. I'm on a daily basis, I am shocked, appalled, and heartbroken, because this can't be real. How is this real? I'm just like, and it's the reason that I wanted us to have this conversation specifically is because we both come from places with really, really, not that, frankly, I think every country in the world has an issue with racism in their own shape or form. So that's a whole other topic that we can get into. Every country's got some story, but our two countries specifically have very interesting stories. Of course, the US, slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights era, segregation, all of this stuff that kind of culminating in the world that we see on the news today. I'm South African, and my skin color is on the wrong side of history. White South Africans are, for all intents and purposes, the kind of the personification of the devil, because if you look back at the history that my forefathers wrote, I can't help but look back in disbelief, because the world that I grew up in, that, like, and I say grew up in, I don't mean in a more existential sense, I mean the literal towns and cities that I grew up in. I was one of very few white faces. I am a white South African kid. I grew up in Tanzania. I lived there for 7 years. My family were expats, and we were welcomed and we were treated amazingly. And I'm aware that because of colonial history, how much that is also white privilege is involved there. I'm aware of that. But at the same time, I have to say that it's just, some of the nicest human beings on earth. At the same time, I then lived in Sudan, same thing. I then lived in Egypt, same thing. I then lived in Yemen, same thing. I then went back to South Africa. I lived in South Africa for another 5 years and still welcomed by people of color, still treated like I'm one of them, like I'm part of the family. And it somehow makes me so angry. It makes me so angry. I'm fucking livid that it's this group of people that just are so desperate to hang on to some illusion of, well, it's not an illusion, it's too real, but to hang on to this power and this political, financial, societal position that they've built for themselves on the backs of other people, suffering and torture, and they're so desperate to cling on to it, this ridiculous system, that they would go out of their way to hurt someone.
Yeah.
If that's not fucking criminal, then I don't know what is. That it's crime.
There's a lot of things that I've been reading about how, and it sounds, for me, it's kind of silly to say because obviously it's the world that we live in, but why is this a debate? Like, how is this a debate? People wanting equal rights isn't a debate. That's just human rights. That's not a political issue. That's just human rights. That's not, and all of that is fine and well to say, but I think what I've seen stressed and what I think is important to stress during all of this is that this isn't just about one love. We're all people, we're all family, all this, but more focusing on why it's happening. How did we get here? And for America, it's systematic oppression. It's systemic. We were built on literally two people, Republicans and Democrats, fighting each other to end slavery or to not end slavery. America was founded on half people who benefited greatly from that and did not want to let that go. Those were the people making the laws. Those were the people implementing the rules. And when you have a country built on those rules, one side is not playing a fair game. And this is the part that I think that a lot of people don't see or understand, is that this has been built into a system. So rhetoric you'll hear a lot is that you just work hard enough. If you work hard enough, you can get anything that you want. However, one side of the team is playing 450 years behind. They're not playing with the same advantage. I've drawn out diagrams for friends before, for family members, where it's like you had a group of people who weren't allowed to get an equal education as your grandparents and your grandparents. You have a group of people who have consistently had their communities burned down when they start to get anywhere in the world. This isn't an equal playing field. So when you say things like just work hard or treat people on a one-on-one basis, it's not realistic. And until we can acknowledge that, and I say we as white people in America can acknowledge the fact that the rules haven't been the same, the playing field hasn't been even, then we're not going to get anywhere. Because, and again, I'm quoting memes at this point, but this isn't a black problem. This is a American problem. This is all of us problem, and the only way we fix it is for all of us to start recognizing our own biases, our own racism, and it's so hard, and I know when you're like, I don't get it, but it's really hard to look at yourself in the mirror and go, yep, that was racist. Yep, that was shit. Yep, that was, because nobody wants to admit that they are, because not me. Not my family. No, that's just grandma. That's just the way grandma talks. No, that can't be my brother. My brother is just joking. It's just a joke. And if we can't start addressing that, then we're not going to see the change that we really all want to see. And that's when you start seeing, and I'm going to keep calling them Karen. I'm sorry if in 10 years that's super offensive, but when you see a Karen at Denny's telling people to go back to their country, or in the supermarket saying go back to Mexico, or when you see these things, you understand that people are genuinely mean and nasty and awful. And I feel like I can't fight that right now with anger. I just want to fight that with education. Though I'm pissed off beyond belief, I can't scream at Karen because Karen clearly isn't fucking getting it. You know what I mean? I need to tell Karen, hey, if you were on the receiving end of that, would you think that that's fair? If we burned down your communities and enslaved your grandparents and didn't allow you to get an education, do you think you'd be in the position that you are today? And having people realize that on their own, you know, like, no amount of shouting that I can do in the position that I have today is going to help them understand and going to create the change that I want to see. And that's what I can do. As a white person, a white American, that's what I can do to try to make tomorrow not look so shitty.
And I think that you talk about educating and learning, and precisely the fact that people will say, oh, but it's not, I know my grandparents said XYZ, but it's not, you know, they just grew up like that. They grew up in a different world, or whatever the family member or the friend or the significant other, even whatever the case is, where someone's like, oh, but it's not, you know, don't misunderstand them. They don't mean it like that.
Yeah.
That
they don't know any better. Well, it's your job to teach them better.
And not only
that's
that,
the responsibility that I think we need to start
moment,
taking.
In that situation where whatever it was that was said is being misconstrued, as a white person, you feel uncomfortable. And that's the point. We avoid it because it's uncomfortable. We avoid it because we don't want to sit with this feeling of, oh yeah, but you know, it's not me. I didn't do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. I didn't, you know, it's 400 years ago. What did I do? It's not me. Like, it's my ancestors. No, but that's the point. Is if for the next 400 years we say that, our kids say that, our grandchildren say that, our great-grandchildren, if we continue saying, but it's not me, then the problem will never be fixed.
Yeah.
If you don't do the work, if you don't sit in your discomfort, acknowledge and heal the discomfort by helping, the discomfort will never go away. And it shouldn't. The discomfort shouldn't go away. The idea of treating a human being badly should never be comfortable. Yeah. It should never be a comfortable notion. It should never be a moment like where you think, yeah, that makes sense, that I would treat someone like that. That should never happen. So if you feel uncomfortable,
there's a telling video. Well, there's a few things that I guess we can talk about at this point in the juncture. There's a video. You've probably seen it. I cannot remember the activist's name, but she's an older white female, very short,
I love her
white
so
hair.
much. I think it's something Miss Collins or something.
Yeah, and she gets up and she says, anybody who would change positions with an African American, raise your hand. And nobody raises their hand, obviously. She says, I don't think you understood the question. Anybody in this room who would trade places with them, raise your hand. And that's telling. And it's the same thing that happened with, what's her name, Amy Cooper, where she weaponized race. She knew that she could. And it's that acknowledgement. And I think this is why this time is different, is you have a few, what is it called when you tip over things and they fall? A few dominoes that happened in order for this moment to happen here. You have Corona. And there's a video, we'll link it down in the description, by Trevor Noah. And I think he puts together these pieces so perfectly. It's like a 17-minute video, but it's how everything got here. First, you had Corona. 43 million Americans lost their jobs. So you have a group of people who are A, at home, and B, frustrated, C, now going on the brink of like recession. Like we're in a point here where things are very hostile. Then you have Ahmaud Arbery, and no charges were made until that video came out. And even then, it took massive amounts of people talking to get all three of them arrested. Then you have Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And that, again, at the hands of police. Now, this isn't your regular schmegular citizen with a hero complex in a severely racist mentality. You have the actual officers. Then you have Amy Cooper, who weaponized race, which meant that she acknowledged what would happen. She knew that I could say that an African American man is attacking me or harassing me, and that the police would do something about it. The police would get so upset that they would show up, and that would actually put that man, what's his name? His last name's Cooper as well. I don't remember his first name. Would put that man in fear. And so it's that acknowledgement, the acknowledgement of I know what happens when. Then police consistently killing innocent people that tumbled all this over. You just had a recipe for a perfect storm. And there was another thing I read that said we're at a moment in history where anything can happen, both good and bad. We're at a point where something's going to change. Does it lean into the good? Inshallah. But literally anything can happen. We have Trump in office, so that's always a good time. But people are waking up, and I hate we're all woke, but people are waking up to what's happening in the systemic oppression and how long it's been going on, and the fact that we all have to stay even during all this, the phrase that's been present more and more and more is it's not enough to just not be racist. You need to be anti-racist.
Actively
and
anti-racist,
I think that's, yeah, I think that's powerful, because that's it. We can't just not be racist and carry about our lives living in this privilege and watching the discrimination and racism happen over there. We have to actively decide to participate in being anti-racist. And I think that's the biggest shift this time. And people having social media to be able to tell their own stories, that the narrative isn't just controlled by the media. The narrative isn't just controlled by what you see on CNN or Fox or BBC. People in the streets at the protests are able to tell their story, are able to show their narrative, are able to show what's actually happening at any given point. And people are able to see a well-rounded perspective opposed to just what they're consuming on TV.
And I think in a world where we have the opportunity to see these things now, because the whole thing is how many, not to get too graphic, but how many lynchings happened that we didn't know about?
Exactly. I keep asking people, how many police reports look exactly like George Floyd's, or exactly like Ahmaud Arbery's, or exactly like Breonna Taylor's, and there was no cameras. There was nobody. Well, Breonna Taylor's is a whole other thing, but how many police reports looked exactly like that, and nobody was around to record it? And you want to tell me it's never happened before? That this is a one of the few bad apples.
Yeah.
No.
And I think the reason that I want to hope that this time is different is that there's a difference between a politician doing it out of understanding that that's what his people want, and if he's going to keep his seat, then he has to follow through. There's a difference between that happening and him doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
That's what still worries me. And I hope that, I don't want to say I hope that that's the middle ground. I hope that even if one or two politicians are doing it just to keep their seats and some shit changes, it's almost better than nothing.
Well, of course it is, because that's exactly how a democracy works. You speak for the people or you don't sit there. You know what I mean? And whether or not, and this sounds kind of condescending to say, but you're a mouthpiece. You're a mouthpiece for the people. And if you're not going to be that and you're not going to accurately represent that, then see you later, sir. And I don't think them just doing that for the public or to remain in their seat is necessarily wrong, because that's exactly what you're there for. You're to represent the people that you're supposed to be representing.
Yeah.
And if those people keep shouting at you to do something and to change something, it is then your responsibility to do something and change something.
Yep.
You can be and say whatever you want, but if you don't actively act on it and do something about it, then it's just words. It's just a tactic, I guess.
Yeah.
At which point you're going to continue to see people rioting. You're going to continue to see protests. You're going to continue to see this kind of clash, because I don't think people are going to sit down this time. I don't think that this is something that blows over in a week where all the politicians can go, Black Lives Matter, so let's go get some lunch. Like I think this time people need and have to pay attention and actively do something about it, because there gets a point, I feel like, for everybody where enough is enough, and I feel like this is that point.
I really hope so. I want to talk about something that is just going back to that discomfort, the feeling of feeling guilty. You said something a couple of days ago which I thought was really interesting, is that we are so far removed from the local in-person activism that's going on. We are not at the protests. We are not physically there.
Yeah.
To be able to show our support. And you're like, you could take this part out if you want, but as the setup to the question, you said something along the lines of, I just feel helpless and I feel guilty that I'm sat in my nice apartment with a sea view while cities are burning and people are in trouble. And I want to go home and I want to do more. How are you reconciling with that feeling? Because I guess in my own way, I also feel like that. I also feel guilty. I do feel guilty. And I don't really know what to do with that feeling. I don't really know how to approach it.
I have two answers to this question. One is, social media is a really powerful tool now, and you can educate so many people, and I can have so many conversations with so many different people from so many different backgrounds, addressing why some things that they say are wrong. And that doesn't have to be from a place of hate. That can be from a place of maybe they don't know. Maybe they genuinely do not know. And maybe nobody's taken time to actually hold a conversation to explain to them why and how. And for a long time we relied on, and this is something that I did learn from Sahar, like, we kept relying on Black people or Black Americans to educate everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not their fucking job. They just live their life being Black. It's not their job to explain it to everybody why being racist is a bad thing, how systemic racism happened. We have literally Google at our fingertips, but maybe it is the job of white Americans or white people in general to help other white people understand why the thinking is flawed, that fundamentally we've been taught a lot of really toxic mentalities. And so for me, having those conversations and fostering them and being able to address some of the things. I have somebody on Instagram, I won't mention their name, but posted All Lives Matter. And I know her. And I know that she does not mean it in a malicious way. She's done so much as far as activism, and I can't say too much because it will give away who she is, but she's done a lot. And she stood by the statement, which was kind of disappointing, but ultimately speaking, being able to be there and say, look, I know you mean well, but this is why it's detrimental to saying Black Lives Matter with the response All Lives Matter. And having that exchange. Now, what they do with that is up to them, but at this point, now they cannot hide behind ignorance. You cannot say I did not know. And then it's your responsibility to do something about it, to do the research, blah, 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 blah. My second part to this question is, this isn't about me. I get to sit over here and I get to be sad or be angry or be whatever, but this isn't about me. And that's it. There's a lot of people with a lot of white guilt or whatever making this narrative about them and centering themselves into the conversation, and it's just not about us. We've been the center of everything for a very long time, and maybe that's what we need to recognize and step aside and let other people's stories and other people's narrative, words, everything move further and stop making us the center of it. That's it. So yeah, I'm homesick, really, really homesick, and I really do wish I was home, but I'm going to do what I can from here and go home when I can, and helpless.
So I guess perhaps on a lighter, more productive note, how do you, there's a couple of, I've seen, start the sentence again, Michael. There's a load of people I've seen, the comment section of any social media platform is a scary place. It's a horrifying reflection of what humanity is, and both the best and worst that it can be. Let's say you're having conversations with other people and someone says things like, I'm just gonna throw you a couple of the normal phrases that you'll hear. So people will say things like, so what's your response? Or give me your All Lives Matter response. Like, if someone who's trying to be an ally is faced with the response that, yeah, cool, but all lives matter. What's the response?
Duh. The response I've seen a lot on social media, and I've saved the meme so I can just send it on along, is the burning house meme.
Yep. Is
just because all houses matter. This one's on fire right now. So if we can take care of that. Personally, for me, Black Lives Matter isn't a statement of like Black Lives Matter. It's a movement. It's a whole, let's say, brand. If you want to think about it in business terms, it's a brand. So when you take this Black Lives Matter and you say all lives matter, you're discounting what's actually going on. Yes, but then you're making it about you again. It's that white guilt that I care about things, and there's so many problems going on all over the world, and that's something you're seeing a lot here is, what about Palestine? What about Syria? And from the mouths of Palestinians, they're putting up signs of Black Lives Matter. In Syria, they're putting up signs of Black Lives Matter. Like, if they themselves understand that this is a whole movement, then who the hell are you to throw their name in the fucking mix? You know what I mean? Like, this all lives matter bullshit. Yes, duh, we fucking know. We get it. We understand that. We got the concept. But right now, that's not what this is about. This isn't about all the people in the universe, because if it was, we wouldn't be having to have this conversation in the first place. There wouldn't be a necessity for it. So yeah.
Or rather, the next one that I've seen a fair amount and is the one about the protests, or the violence thereafter, especially in that I've seen being spoken about with London in particular, is, but how can you condone all of the vandalism and the destruction and this and that? Like, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you would have, there was a statue of a slave trader was torn down and thrown.
Get it, girls. Love
right,
it.
right.
For me, hey.
Yeah. So one of the comments I saw, I'll see if I can find it and bring it back up, because I don't want to. I want to do it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of like, how can you support the vandalism and destruction of these historic things? And the response that I loved was, why is the destruction of one statue more important to you than the fact that there are people being shot for running? Why is that? Why is that what you pick out of these two things?
There's another meme that went around that was like, silent about the murder, silent about murder, vocal about the looting. And I think that's just it. I had this conversation with my flatmate the other day, where he was like talking about the looting and saying that it's destructive. And again, I know him fairly well. Again, we all sit with a little bit of racism in us, whether we know it or not. So I know that we all kind of have to come to terms with that and address it. But I know he meant well when he was saying this. Like, he wasn't saying, oh, those people. It was, they shouldn't be destroying their own cities and their own communities and robbing their own stores. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, but that's not your place to say. If you're truly an ally in this moment, if you are truly being anti-racist, your job is to figure out how we prevent this from happening in the future, not to place judgment on a people who are the ones facing the oppression. It's not your place. And like, there's more to be said as far as like who's actually doing the looting and who's actually doing the vandalizing, and how that isn't all just coming from the Black community. But even if it was, after 450 years of oppression, I might be willing to burn some shit down too. You keep killing my sons, you keep killing my daughters, you keep killing people in the name of accident or a struggle or all this stuff. I'm going to burn some shit down too. And anybody who says, no, I wouldn't handle it that way, you cannot say that because you are not in their position. You cannot speak as if you are when you have never been through it. Yeah. Because you never know how you would handle that. And another thing is like, okay, the peaceful protest, that's great. And there's people out there who are doing that. But when it comes to rioting or looting, which are two separate things, let's get that clear. What are they supposed to do? Hey, please, sir, can you please not kill us anymore? I'd really like it if you could just not. Pretty please?
And especially in a world where the king president is using tear gas to clear the street to go to take a photo, you're telling me peaceful protest is going to work?
Exactly. Not that, but we have been. Like, the image that I've been seeing a lot is Colin Kaepernick. You should have listened when we were doing it peacefully. And nobody did. And that's the thing. And there's a whole psychology behind it, as far as peaceful protests are a way to keep your people in line so things don't get out of hand, are a way to keep things simmered down enough so that revolutions and civil wars don't happen. But right now isn't the time for, honestly, and I hate to say this, is to be peaceful. I feel really, really bad for small business owners and anybody affected by this. like by vandalism or rioting or whatever. And then I would prefer if it was just the targets and these big corporations. But in my mind, this is in the middle of a war. This isn't a regular Tuesday where somebody's shop was burned down in an irresponsible act. You know what I mean? There's a reason people are in the streets right now. There's a reason that this is happening. And sure, it's terrible. And even if there's a documentary on Netflix called LA 92 talking about the LA riots and result of Rodney King. And it sucks. It really sucks. But in order to fix that, you have to fix what caused it. We don't get to just stand on our soapboxes and say, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing that, when we weren't talking to the police about the same thing. When we haven't been talking to the people who make laws and the president, when we've been voting in racist ass presidents. Like, you don't get to go, stop doing that. You get to take your mouth and decide what side of history you're on. I don't think anybody, especially with a particular complexion, has the right to be telling anybody who is oppressed how to deal with that oppression.
Yep. I got nothing. Like, I agree completely. I am in light of sort of how people have responded to all of these things, which I think it's frankly, I'll take whatever positives I can get out of this, which is stuff like the police officers being charged, stuff like I think, forgive my lack of American geographical knowledge, but is it Minneapolis or Minnesota? Minnesota's the state, Minneapolis is the city.
Correct.
So if I understood correctly, there's been agreement by the government in Minnesota to defund and deconstruct the police department that was responsible. Stuff like Cuomo, he's the mayor or the governor of New York?
Yeah, the governor.
He has introduced a bill called to do with false 911 calls, making it a hate crime. There are incredible organizations working to support people and work towards a community that people can feel safe in. And as a result, we kind of wanted to direct this episode there. So instead, we're not asking you to subscribe to us. We're asking you to please donate, support, share, whatever the hell it is that you can do, whatever it is, in whatever shape or form, whether that is having the uncomfortable conversations that we need to have with the people that we love. Do it. Whatever it is that you have to do, that you can do, just do it. And I think probably the point that I would end on is, which I think is kind of the ultimate decider, is which side of history do you stand on? It is really as simple as that. That's all it is. That's all it is. Are you going to be the person that just let it happen, or are you going to be able to tell your family, in your family story, however many hundreds of years from now, where did you stand when the coin fell?
100%.
So, yep, if you are watching this, then please, of course, support in whatever way you can. Do the work that you need to do, and continue to do the work that you need to do. And yeah, I guess that's it from us. So
we'll see you guys in the next episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you do know people you need to have conversations with, I encourage you to do that. If this video will anyway help that conversation, please send it to your friends. Then I'd encourage you to do that if that's an easier way for you to host that conversation, to start that conversation, to what's the word I'm looking for? To enter it. Hey, I listened to this podcast. What you think?
Yeah.
If that helps at all. But there's many more resources than me and Michael. They're all over the internet. There's a lot of even white people writing books on how to deal with the racism that's ingrained in our cultures and in our society. There's books by Black creators, videos, movies, documentaries that you can consume and share with people who may need to hear it as well. That being said, I think we're going to sign off and see you in the next episode.
So, yep, thank you guys so much for watching. And we'll see you later. Peace out.